Yes, printed a year-old interview today in which George McGovern says he was approached by Daniel Ellsberg to release the Pentagon Papers, but he refused and referred him to the New York Times. Congressman John Melcher of Montana has asked federal auditors to investigate whether windfall profits made by grain companies, given advance word of the U.S.-Russian wheat deal, can be recovered by the taxpayers. A last-minute goal gave Canada a 6-5 victory over Russia tonight in hockey, as the Canadians came back to win the 8-game series that drove sports fans in both countries into a frenzy. The hour's top story, the administration says crime increased in the U.S. only 1% so far this year, the lowest climb since before the 1960s. Carl Stern, NBC News.
Next, WPTF Regional Report. It's 73 degrees with light rain at 6 minutes after 7 o'clock. In the top news of the region, Governor Scott has posted a $5,000 reward for information leading to the killer of State Highway Patrolman Joe Wright. Attorney General Morgan told the Advisory Budget Commission today that Wright's death might have been avoided if he had been able to check in with the new Police Information Network before he stopped the killer's car on a rural Person County road. Cutter Laboratories of Berkeley, California has announced plans to construct a $10 million plant at Clayton in Johnston County. Company President David Cutter says the facility will employ at least 350 Tar Heels and could grow to a 1,000-member workforce. The Raleigh City Council has indicated it will approve a $70,000 appropriation to employ men and equipment to handle increasing drainage problems in the developing suburbs. Under the program, the city crew will install facilities paid for by private landowners. And that's news of the region at 7 minutes after 7 o'clock. Ken Smith reporting for WPTF News. Next regional report at 8:05 this evening on WPTF. This is the program Open Line, a public discussion of a topic of current interest, controversy, and concern in the WPTF community. Your host is Bart Ritner.
Thank you very much, Ken. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Kaleidoscope Open Line, and it is with a great deal of pleasure that we welcome a special friend for many years. We call him Papy around here. His name is Graham Pointer, and he has been program manager for WPTF since the very infant days of this station. And tonight he and I are going to reminisce with you about the golden days of radio and the early days right up to modern-day WPTF. Papy, welcome to our program.
Thank you very much, Bart. I'm glad to be here. And I would like to observe that I was told this afternoon that this was going to be a rather auspicious occasion. Yet I see that you do not have on your tuxedo. Neither does Ken Smith. Matter of fact, you are the extreme in informality, and I wonder about that.
Well, it was in the cleaners, Papy, along with my Superman suit.
I see. I tell you, I just threw that in to tell you that at one time on WPTF, we did indeed wear a uniform.
I heard that. I never saw it.
Yes. We, of course, were in studios at that time in what was known, or now known, as the old Durham Life Building, which sat where the new insurance building sits now downtown. We were on ground level, and there were many people who moved in and out of the reception room during the evening. So at 6 o'clock, if you were on the announcing staff, you put on tuxedo trousers, black shoes, black socks. You put on a tuxedo shirt and a tie. And you put on a cummerbund. And then in the summertime, we wore white mess jackets. In the wintertime, we wore red mess jackets. And do you know what people called us?
I have no idea.
They called us monkeys, and that's exactly how we looked.
Well, I've heard the uniform referred to as a monkey suit. This carried on until, well, I suppose relatively recently.
Bart, we moved from that building to a space in the First Citizens Bank and Trust Company building on Martin Street. And, of course, we were temporary there, waiting for our new studios to be built in the new insurance building. And there was no room there for people to come and nothing for them to see, really. And that ended the uniform, and we were glad of it.
I was under the impression that it was carried over into the insurance building.
On second thought, I think it was. I believe when... Now, I was not here. I was
You were in the service.
Working for Uncle Sam. But I do believe that they went sort of spit and polish when they opened the studios in the insurance building.
You gave up a lucrative career as a teacher to get into radio back in the when?
I think your use of the adjective is faulty, Bart. But yes, I was a school teacher and was headed in that direction. Very, very anxious to get into radio, but there were very few stations in North Carolina, 4 or 5 at the time, and they, for the most part, were what we call loss operations. So their staffs were small, no place to train for radio, no schools, and no place to get a job, and so it was a pretty discouraging thing. But I walked in one day, and they needed someone who could stand on his feet and say, ah, and I could do both, and I've been here ever since.
You've been here 38 years, haven't you?
If I were to stay until December 31, yes, 38, Bart.
Well, my math fails me on the spot. 38 from 72 puts you walking in this door when?
Actually, I left my teaching job at the Christmas holidays in 33.
1933.
And I came and sort of did a trial. And then I went back to my teaching job in 34, very discouraged. And one day I was called and told to come to work. So they just split the longevity. They gave me the days that I worked in December 33 for the days that I didn't work in 34, and so my time began Jan 1, 34.
Papy, you and I could talk, I suppose, for hours on end, but I think we ought to give the listeners a crack at you. Our number in Raleigh is 828-0742. Good evening. This is Open Line. You're on the air.
Bart, I'd like to ask Mr. Pointer something about a children's program that they used to have a long time ago. It seems that Bill and Wally were talking about a program called The Birthday Party, and they said, at least I understood them to say, that it originated with Kingdom Scott and Uncle Scotty. But I remember somebody named Old Man Happy.
Indeed you do, ma'am, and that gentleman is still alive and well today. He's a great friend of mine. We have lunch together every Wednesday. His name is Gordon Merriweather, Jr., and so far as I know, he was the original Old Man Happy on the children's birthday party.
Well, that's the way I remembered it, and I remembered it as that you could write in and get a happy birthday wish, or you could come over and sing if you wanted to. Was that correct?
You're absolutely right, and they'd always say or tell the children on the radio, look behind the radio for your gift. It was almost a cliche phrase on the program, and at one time we were criticized for it. But the program was immensely popular, drew a great deal of mail, a wagon load of mail, and was on the air, I don't know how long, 10, 15, 20 years, I suppose.
Well, I want to ask you something else, too. I came along during those Depression years, and incidentally, I'm still a school teacher. But I remember back in the depths of the Depression, and Amos and Andy, was one of the programs we always listened to.
Yes, ma'am.
And I remember those two kind gentlemen played the national anthem instead of their theme song on a couple occasions.
It could have happened. I do not remember it, but it could have happened. Incidentally, they came to Raleigh in person in the height of their career. They played 3 programs or 3 shows, live shows, at the State Theater on Salisbury Street, and then from WPTF studios, they broadcast coast to coast. And I remember that they would not permit a studio audience because they didn't want people to see their microphone technique. They did their whole program at that time on that particular script, all the voices, Amos, Andy, etc., and their microphone shadings as they moved in and out, back and forth, they felt, I suppose, was sort of patented, so they didn't permit anybody but our technician, who, of course, had to watch them, and he did it from another room.
Well, I thank you, Mr. Pointer. I've enjoyed this as I enjoyed WPTF.
You are kind to call. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good night. Papy, I think it's interesting to note here, too, that Freeman Gosden and Charles Correll first met in Durham.
Bart, I've heard that story, and I've also heard that they were traveling in what once were called minstrel shows, Sometimes those shows appeared in theaters, sometimes in tents, and that they both came to Elizabeth City, North Carolina, and both of their shows went broke simultaneously. And Correll and Gosden got to know each other. They sort of hitchhiked back to Chicago and formed a team called Sam and Henry. And they went on WGN Chicago as Sam and Henry. And later they went to another station and had to give up the name because the name Sam and Henry belonged to WGN. And I may be quoting from a newspaper article because Charlie Correll died
Just died
the
yesterday,
other day.
the day before, yes.
And they were in an elevator, I believe, and heard somebody say the name Amos and Andy, and that's where the name of the act came from.
That's very interesting. It's interesting where these stories got started, too.
Yes.
And I don't know that anybody will ever know the... Well, I'm sure somebody knows the real story as to where they met.
Bart, the day that they were in the State Theater, I had the responsibility of checking with them about details for the nationwide broadcast, and I found them in a small dressing room in back of the stage at State. They were very hot back there, and I think it was Amos who was sitting at a typewriter using the Hunt and Peck system, and Andy was walking up and down the floor, and they were building their script in dialect.
For the radio show?
For that show that night, apparently.
That's very... They cut it close, didn't they?
Yes, most interesting.
Working close to the vest. All right. Out-of-towners toll-free from any telephone in the state, area code 800-662-7727. Good evening. This is Open Line. You're on the air.
Mr. Porter?
Yes, indeed.
I just want to tell you that I've been listening to WPTF ever since you came on. Do you remember an announcer long about the time you first came on named Jack Neff?
Indeed I do, and do you happen to know where he is today?
No, I don't. He was really good, though. I remember you and him, though, and Gordon Merriweather and all the announcers since then. But some wonderful ones. Some of the ones we got now are just out of this world. I've just always thought WPTF was just the best station. The first radio I owned was one that I got in 33. And that was long about the time you went to work there, wasn't it?
Went to work at Christmas time, 33.
I think I got that radio for Christmas that year.
I'm glad you did, and if you could see...
I'll tell my age directly, but I was a young girl.
Well, if you could see me now, you'd realize that I am bowing in your direction. Thank you so much.
Well, I wanted to tell you, though, you were talking about the Amos and Andy a while ago. We had some people on PTF that went on to be famous too, like Chet Atkins and Lester Earl and Johnny Wright and Kitty Wells and lots of people that...
Indeed we did, and we have a young correspondent for NBC television in Berlin now, Bob Hager.
Yeah, I remember him.
We have Clay Daniel, who is a co-producer for the Dean Martin and the Bob Hope shows.
Yeah.
We have Roger Foster, who is a staff man for CBS television in New York.
Oh, man, we've had some celebrities, sure enough, haven't we?
Some fine people have been by WPTF.
And we still have some. You know, when Bill Jackson first came, I remember, it seemed like for about 6 months now, somebody would say every once in a while, BJ's coming, BJ's coming, and I wondered what in the world BJ was. And now I know, and I really enjoy him.
He's one of the great ones, no question about it.
Yes, we have some fine ones up there. I just want you to know we all enjoy them very much, and we've enjoyed you, and hope you have a nice retirement. I'm retired now, too.
I'm going to work at it, and thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night. Good evening. This is Open Line. You're on the air.
Mr. Porter,
Yes, indeed.
I was a little girl, but I remember somebody getting married on WPTF. Now, tell me who that was. I was just a little girl.
That was a young lady who was on staff by the name of Peggy Fussell, Fussell,
Yeah?
and a technician on our staff named Felton Williams.
Well, everybody was talking about it, and I remember it, and it was a wonderful thing then.
It may have been the first time that any two people had ever gotten married on radio.
Mm-hmm.
We had a very innovative manager in those days by the name of Mr. H.K. Carpenter.
Well, didn't she play the piano or something?
She did indeed. She did indeed, and he was a technician. And incidentally, he is now on the technical staff at WBAL Baltimore.
Oh.
And Felton and Peggy came by, 6 or 8 weeks ago to see us, and they both look fine.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, it's nice to have you on the air tonight.
Thank you so much.
Good night.
Thank you for calling. Good night. 828-0742. Pappy, you've seen a lot of changes in this biz called radio since you came here and since it reared its lovely head back in the 20s, haven't you?
Yes, Bart, I suppose I came in at the beginning of what we now know as commercial radio. I went through the Depression days when we were a loss operation. I was here when we began in the black, so to speak, from 1,000 watts to 5,000 to 50,000. We have moved the studio part of the operation. I think I counted the other day either 10 or 11 times since I've been here. We, of course, had our transmitter when I came on the roof of the Sir Walter Hotel. And then we went to the present location at Cary. We've had a tower blow over at Cary. We've had a transmitter, a brand new transmitter, within days of operation to burn.
Those Japanese transistors, I'm sure.
And then, of course, the golden days of radio, the big bands, the change of radio. I'll not say the exodus of radio because it hasn't happened at all. Television has its place, and I watch television and enjoy it. But radio has its place, too, and I think that radio is more effective today than it ever was before, in spite of the fact that we, too, once operated under the star system.
And I'm sure that radio has today a larger audience than it has ever enjoyed before.
I would imagine so, in spite of the fact that there are more radio stations, one on every corner, it seems.
Right.
But radio today, I think, is doing a good job of entertainment and information. And we do it instantaneously, and I think we do it well.
I have to agree with you. Good evening. This is Open Line. You're on the air.
This is one of the old-timers who used to be there on some of your programs before even Mr. Pointer was there.
Hello, old-timer. How are you?
I'm fine. This is Mary Noble. We were there in 27 and 28 when George Sutherland was the first announcer.
Incidentally, Mrs. Noble, I heard just the other day that George is in Richmond, a part-time salesman on a Richmond radio station and doing very well.
Is that right?
Yes.
Well, I'll declare.
Well, I remember you quite well, even though I hadn't started to work here. You and the doctor and your programs on WPTF, and I recall that you were very popular.
Bob and Reed.
That's right.
We came on with the Carolina song, Carolina, and Dr. Noble said the land of the long-leaf pine,
Yes.
and it went right with it.
Yes.
We worked it out, so it went together.
Good to hear from you.
And pretty soon after that, Mary O'Kelly came.
Yes, that's right.
And the other day, Bart, they sent me some pictures of their present staff.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so glad to have them, and I'm going to come down there and visit you.
Thank you very much, and we thank you for calling.
You're quite welcome.
Uh-huh.
Goodbye.
Good night. Good evening. This is Open Line. You're on the air.
Mr. Pointer,
Yes, indeed.
could you tell me whether One Man's Family was sponsored by Pet Milk in the 40s when it was on your station?
One Man's Family.
Uh-huh.
I do not remember Pet Milk being associated with the program, but you have hit me with a sort of a hard one now, because while I will remember the programs and some of the people who appeared on the programs,
I see.
the sponsorship gives me a little trouble because sponsorship switched from time to time.
Oh, yes.
But Bart and I have references here,
Uh-huh.
and we're going to be able to tell you.
Well,
One Man's Family, this reference says, by Standard Brands Incorporated on behalf of Tenderleaf Tea. Now, you could be right because sponsorship changed many times.
I see. Well, why I asked you was because I have two souvenirs that I sent in for listening to One Man's Family. And one is a miniature tall can of Pet Milk, a little charm that goes on a bracelet.
Yes.
And the other one is a top that goes on a can of small milk. It had two little prongs in there that you push it down and it put two holes in this small can of milk to pour.
then I think you are exactly right. If you have those souvenirs from the program, then Pet Milk did sponsor it.
Well, I still have those, of course, the little things that made the holes in the can. They're gone, but I still have the top, and I still have that little miniature can of, tall can of Pet Milk.
Well, that was a fine program, and I'm glad you remember it.
Just wonderful, and it's a treat to have you on tonight because I hardly ever hear you on the air unless you're with Mr.
Harris.
Yes, that's right, on Saturday.
Yes.
So, good luck.
Thank you so much, and thank you for calling.
All right.
Good night. Out-of-towners toll-free from any telephone in the state, area code 800-662-7727. Good evening, this is Open Line. You're on the air.
I'd like to speak to Mr. Pointer.
He is right across the microphone from you.
Okay, Bart, the Birdman.
I'll never live that down, will I?
This is an old timer too. I'm not quite so old, but when I was a very small child, I remember hearing...
Can I interrupt? Would you turn your radio down a little bit for me?
I remember hearing the walk-a-thon or the dance-a-thon from Raleigh.
Yes, sir.
It's the old Carolina Pine.
You are exactly right, and...
Well, I'd like to know who was the announcer there, and just what the program was about. I remember it was very intense. I was in Smithfield at the time, and it was everybody just crowded around the radio to see who was eliminated, and it seemed that WPTF carried that.
I can tell you what it was about. A promotion group came to town, and they rented what I recall as a bowling alley or maybe a dance hall out at what once was Carolina Pines on the Fayetteville Highway from Raleigh. And they'd have people out there who would dance until they could dance no longer.
Just drop down in the track.
That's right. And I recall that the master of ceremonies was named Jerry something, but I will have to strike out on his last name. They came on 2 occasions, as I recall, 2 different companies. There was a tremendous amount of interest.
That's right.
If you went out there, I think you paid $1 or $2 to sit and watch them struggle.
Yeah.
But they let enough broadcasts be done on WPTF to sort of whet the people's interest, and there was a tremendous amount of interest.
That was so intensive. Everybody was so interested in that, and just wondered. And I think the winners got a prize of money.
That is right, they did. But I can tell you from having to go out there and do the broadcast from time to time, it was one of the most depressing sights you ever saw.
And another thing, the first milkshake I ever won was from the Streetman Street Man.
How about that? That has been a long time ago.
Right. Lots of luck to you, and God bless you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for calling.
Bye-bye.
Good night. Good evening, this is Open Line. You're on the air.
Ed Clement.
Yes, sir.
I've heard of you. Go right ahead.
Just a word of thanks to Grimm for the high standard of programs which WPTF has maintained during his 27 years, which I've had the pleasure of listening to it.
Ed, you were very kind to call, and if we had enough time...
That's all right. I just wanted Grimm to know that I personally called, and he knows what I think of him personally anyway.
Well, he's on the phone with you.
I'm on the phone with you, Ed, and if we had enough time, I could say a few of the nice things that ought to be said about you. But
I've been trying to get you for 10 minutes, but the people interested in talking.
You're kind to call, Ed, and thank you so much.
Thank a lot for what you've done, fella.
Thank you, sir.
Good night. I take it you wanted to cast some accolades his way.
Yes, Mr. Clement has been, of course, at one time headed up the Raleigh office of Southern Bell Telephone and Telegraph. Is now, even though he is retired from Southern Bell, is engaged very actively in telephone association activities, and I doubt that Raleigh has ever had a finer public servant than Ed Clement. I think a lot of people will agree with me on that.
Wonderful. Good evening. This is Open Line. You're on the air.
Uncle Graham.
Hello there.
Oh, it's nice to hear your voice. You know, I was just thinking we need to hear about the Woofity Woof review. Do you remember that?
Just slightly. I remember it from what people told me, because that was a little before my time.
That's right. Cecil Bell, I believe, used to run that program.
He did indeed, and Mary O'Kelly participated.
Remember.
Perhaps Claiborne Mangum took part, and I know that our manager, who retired just a short while ago, Dick Mason, was a part of the cast.
You remember when Dick used to come on Sunday evening and play Kingham Scott used to play the organ, and Richard would read the poetry?
Yes, indeed. I remember that quite well.
Well, you know, I was just thinking about some of the other programs that meant so much to people. The job you folks did so well, I think goes overlooked, and that was the job that you did with the schools throughout this area in connection with the talent that was available. You know, I can recall when many times during a year a school could climax its glee club activities by coming to WPTF and putting on their program. And then you had such things as the Atwater Kent Foundation contest for auditions to, get talent off the ground.
Over the years, we have tried very hard to discover new talent. One of the best things I think we ever did was offer a scholarship to the Eastman School of Music.
That's right.
Which was won by a young lady in town. She did very well, and we were very proud of her. These things were a part and parcel of WPTF's life. We felt that's why we were here, and we felt that we were probably the best outlet for talent anywhere in town.
Well, it did do a great job, and then you had such programs as Walter Damreich for the NBC
Yes, sir.
Music Appreciation Hour.
That is right. That is
on
right.
Sunday afternoon, you had this program with John Philip Sousa.
And we later on had the NBC Symphony with Dr. Toscanini.
Oh, yes, and of course they put on that program with the man behind the legend for so long,
Yes.
And some of the different things. Let me ask you if you ever heard the story about John Philip Sousa. I heard that his name was actually John Philip S.O. So.
I've heard that, and I've never been able to substantiate it.
Then another thing was you were talking about the beginning of the Metropolitan Opera, was on the air
Yes, sir.
at this time. But here's the thing that came to my mind. I remember I think it was 41 or 42, when you went to the 50,000 watts. You did it in the evening about sunset. I can recall the program. And I recall that you had the governor with you at that time. And I was over in a place just not too far from Raleigh. And we expected when you went to 50,000 watts that it would just about blow the speakers out. But all of a sudden, it went away, way in the distance. And I don't know whether you folks are aware of it or not, but at night, in this state, Raleigh is not too easy to get after sunset. Have you ever had complaints about that?
Yes, sir, we have. And here, in the layman's language, and it'll have to be a layman's language because I am no technician, we operate on the same frequency along with other radio stations on 680 kilocycles. And the Federal Communications Commission requires us to reduce our signal at sunset Raleigh time in order to provide protection for these other stations also operating on 680. And they require them to do the same thing so that we don't interfere with each other.
I see.
So our coverage after sunset Raleigh time looks a great deal like a clover leaf.
I see.
And that's why yes, sir, we are very conscious of it because people complain all the time, and there's absolutely nothing we can do about it.
Well, I didn't know just what it was that created it, but how do you feel about radio as compared in the old days? Do you feel it has lost its touch with the community in this failure to involve talent and failure to involve the schools and churches of the community as much as it used to? Or do you feel that there's some difference now about that or not?
No, sir, I think radio has assumed a new role, a new and different role from what it was when you and I listened to the so-called big shows and we did the things that you have described. But as I told Bart a little early in the broadcast, I think radio is doing a more effective job today than ever before because the world has changed. And you and I are going to have to face that. I'm trying hard to face it. The world has changed, and the requirements of people are different requirements now, and radio has simply had to sort of step into the breach and do some things that television couldn't do, and I think that has been radio's salvation in a great respect.
Well, do you feel that radio had to make all this change, or do you feel like that it was a case of the tail wagging the dog? I mean by that, for instance, many managers used to say that the people want, but I always felt if you could tell really what the people wanted, you could make more doing that, you could manage a radio station.
Well, we have certain means of knowing approximately what a sample of the people want. We take surveys and we watch our fan mail, and quite frankly, we listen to people when they talk on the telephone, we meet people on the street, we see friends and people who are not always our friends at meetings of various kinds, and they give us a pretty good idea of how we are being accepted, and we try to arrange our programs along that line. Now, in doing that, we know full well that we do not satisfy everybody. And so WPTF, from its very inception, has tried to be something to practically everybody in the family, and we're still trying today. How well we're succeeding, you as a listener would have to judge.
Well, I'm sure, but the point of it is, today with radio on the air, don't you feel that there's not enough variety to make the selection? I mean by that, you find that if you turn from, say, if I don't particularly like your program and I switch over to another, I don't find that much difference, because it's pretty much all a phonograph machine now, except just programs of this kind, or maybe your emphasis programs or things of that nature. But between that, you don't have, for instance, you've lost your personalities for the most part. I mean, they're there, but you don't get quite the same setup that you do. For instance, Bart is a personality. You recognize him to be, but still, Bart is, most of the time, it's pretty much routine with him, except on maybe a show something similar to this. Do you feel that we've lost something in that?
Well, of course, in the old days, when Bart would have been sitting in the studio taking station breaks every half hour, you would have heard very little of Bart. You would have been listening to soap operas, you would have been listening to Jack Benny or Fred Allen. So I think the whole character of the business has changed, and I think radio, since the coming of television, has assumed its proper role, and I believe an important role.
Let me ask you, do you know what became of H.K. Carpenter? He went out towards Cleveland, but where is he now?
Mr. Carpenter did go to Cleveland and managed a network of radio stations there, and he is now dead.
Well, I didn't know that. How about Les Beeble? Whatever took, he went...
Les Beeble is working, as best I know, with Westinghouse in Cleveland.
You know, Les Beeble was discovered by Jim Harkins, or was sent down in this way by Jim Harkins, and as you know, Jim Harkins was Fred Allen's right-hand man.
That is right.
And he was the fellow, Jim Harkins was, who probably did more to bring Red Skelton out.
Yes, sir.
Than probably the other. Well, I've taken a lot of your time, but you've been awfully kind to talk with me, and I do appreciate your feelings and your thoughts.
Thank you for calling.
I wish for you a real happy retirement, and I tell you that we'll miss you around the radio.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Papy, I think if we don't comply with the Federal Communications Commission and take a station break, we may not have a license next week this time.
Let's do that.
This is the voice of the capital city, station WPTF, Raleigh, North Carolina. It's 7:37.
Come gather up the savings. It's Tallheimer's Great Fall Sale, with a harvest of values on every floor and in every Tallheimer store. Fall in step with smart, thrifty shoppers and squirrel away big values on new fall and winter fashions, home furnishing, and much more during the great fall sale at the Tallheimers nearest you.
Shop Tallheimer's Great Fall Sale, 10 to 9:30 at Crabtree Valley Mall. Once again, here's Bart.
Thank you again, Ken. Our guest this evening on Kaleidoscope Open Line, Mr. Graham Pointer. He, for the past 38 years, has been here at WPTF and served as program manager, and it's a real pleasure that we have him on tonight. Our number in Raleigh is 828-0742. Out-of-towners, toll-free from any telephone in the state, area code 800-662-7727. Good evening. This is Open Line. You're on the air.
Bart, I have a question for Mr. Pointer.
Go right ahead, sir. I'm listening.
Thank you. Mr. Pointer, back in summer of 1949, I had occasion to attend what they called a television engineering clinic at the RCA facilities in Camden, New Jersey. And it was for the engineering and technical personnel of various broadcasting stations who at that time might be interested in expanding into television. At that time, I met a man named Sam Liles, Liles, who was on the staff of WPTF. Now, when we came to live in Raleigh 10 years ago, I inquired of your then chief engineer, Mr. Hulick, out at your Kerry transmitter, and he didn't seem to know him. I wonder if you remember a person by that name, and if so, whatever became of him.
Yes, sir, I remember him. Sam is a friend of mine, and as best I know, he is now with the Voice of America as a technician, stationed in Florida.
All right, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you for calling.
Thank you. Good night, sir. Good evening. This is Open Line. You're on the air.
Bart, I have a question for Mr. Pointer.
Yes, sir.
We read in the local paper the other day that Abbott and Pierce, after so many years in business, I believe they're going out of business.
No, sir, they are not. They have. Abbott has retired, and Mr. Pierce and two associates are taking over the business, and they are moving to the corner of Boylan and Hillsborough.
Oh, I see. Well, my wife and I were discussing this, and we seem to remember a show, Man on the Street.
Yes, sir.
It was called Allen's Service Station.
Yes, sir.
Best we could remember.
Mr. Henry Allen was either the man who established that station at the foot of Glenwood, or he was one of the early owners, and Abbott and Pierce, who have been there all these many years, came to work for Mr. Allen. Mr. Henry Allen sponsored the Man on the Street, and Carl Gertz, as best I recall, did the broadcast.
Well, that's what she said. I seem to think it was Phil Ellis, but I guess I'll have to score one for her.
Well, now, Phil did later broadcasts on the street, including a program known as the Streetman Streetman, which took place in front of the Wake County Courthouse.
Oh, yes, I remember that one, too.
Yes, sir.
I have one just quick question for you. I understand that Mr. Henry Hewlick has now retired.
Yes, sir.
And I was wondering if he's, well, I guess he's doing all right.
Saw him 2 weeks ago, and he's getting along fine. Lives over near State University, he and his wife.
Uh-huh.
He has 2 children and 2 fine grandchildren, and I know that he'd be glad that you inquired about him.
He was a very good friend of my father-in-law, Steve Starwalt, in Charlotte.
Yes.
He was in Durham at the time with AT&T at that repeater station out in Bragtown.
I think I've heard him mention the name.
And they apparently had some real deals going back.
I'll bet they did.
Well, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you for calling.
Good night. Good evening. This is Open Line. You're on the air.
Oh, Mr. Ritner.
Yes, sir.
Oh, been a half hour getting you. Mr. Pointer available?
He's on the phone with you, sir.
Mr. Pointer.
Yes, sir.
Some old timers want to say howdy. Hold on.
Thank you.
Mr. Pointer?
Yes, indeed.
I've been listening to WPTF since it first broadcast. Heard the first one.
Bless you.
And I have 5 radios, and people gave me 4 of them, and I bought the one on my automobile, and I never listened to that at the WPTF. And I called you not too long ago and told you not to let Bill Jackson work himself to death. Don't you remember I called you and told you to not let Bill Jackson work himself to death?
I remember that quite well.
And bless your heart, and listen, do you remember when you people gave away chest of silver in a contest for the person who wrote the cleverest saying of a child?
Now, I can't remember that, but it probably took place.
Silver, and I went up there and got it. You gave 3 prizes, and I got the first prize, and I won't take time to tell you what I told because, but I'll call you and tell you what I won that chest of silver, and it was during the war, and I even won the chest. You gave away a chest.
You call me tomorrow and tell me about it.
I'll certainly do it.
Thank
Bless your heart.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Just a minute.
Mr. Pointer.
Yes, sir.
I've been listening to WPTF since 1924.
We're glad to have you.
I was in the Army at Fort Bragg. We bought our first radio for the day room. It was an old Atwater Kent set, open panel, you know.
Yes, sir.
With a phonograph horn on it.
Yes, sir.
And they made me custodian and caretaker of it. They battery cart and locked it inside of a cabinet.
Yes.
And I had to carry the key. All those soldiers wanted to listen to the radio every night after supper, so I was stuck. I couldn't go nowhere but sit there and watch it, listen to that radio. WPTF was one of the first stations we ever heard.
That's fine. Most interesting.
And I've been enjoying it ever since.
Thank you, sir.
And more power to all of you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for calling, sir.
Bye.
Good night. 8280742 is our number. Good evening. This is Open Line. You're on the air.
Bart, I wanted Mr. Pointer to comment on where he grew up and where he came from originally. I'm going to hang up and let him comment.
All right. Thank you, sir.
I was born and raised in Currituck County, North Carolina, in a community called Moyock, spelled M-O-Y-O-C-K.
Sure that's not Moyock.
That's how you'd pronounce it, Bart, and you insult me. I stayed there until I entered college. My parents lived there until the late 50s, and I still go back occasionally to see some cousins that I have down there. But if you're trying to get me to say that I was a high-tider. Indeed I was. And as a matter of fact, right now, I sometimes refer to the word T-I-M-E as time. So I hope that all sort of authenticates the thing for you.
Very good. Good evening. This is Open Line. You're on the air.
I'd like to talk to Mr. Porter for just a moment, please.
I'm speaking to you.
Oh, Mr. Porter.
Yes, sir.
I go back to the days of the Crystal set when it was Wynn's radio company before WPTF took it over.
Yes, sir.
And the first programs I used to hear was on an old Atwater Kent thing. But later on, what I really wanted to ask you about is whatever happened to the Lone Star Quartet that y'all used to have that was that man that could play that piano.
Yes.
And they called him Tiny, I think.
That's right. His name was Tiny Taylor, and he is still in the quartet business. He's still accompanying a quartet that operates out of Dallas, Texas. Milton Estes, who was one of the vocalists and who was the master of ceremonies, is no longer living. And one of the men, I believe it was Bert Young or Bert Jones, and I think I'm probably wrong on that, is also living in Texas, where he's operating a small cattle ranch. But Tiny and three of the personnel, Carl Raines, he's still alive, three of the personnel, along with Tiny, the accompanist, are still alive.
Well, good for them, but I'd missed them because I really listened to the...
Do you remember that theme song? Do you remember what it was called?
I've forgotten what
Give the world a smile each day.
A lively thing.
Give the world a smile.
Yeah, give the world a smile. That's right.
Yes.
But I thoroughly enjoy that, and I enjoy your station. I'd rather have that than the other station.
You're so kind, and thank you for calling.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night. It occurs to me, perhaps I should clarify, Papy, after asking you about Moyock, I will tell the people...
You still can't pronounce it.
I never will learn. I think I should mention the fact that you, while you haven't stood over anybody here with a whip, when we've made rather obvious errors, we have usually heard from your office or from you in person with a correction on pronunciation. And I recall having been told that when that word comes up in the news, that is one word you do not mispronounce because you are sure to bring down the wrath of the program department head.
Well, Bart, many people call it Mo-Rock or Mo-Rack or Moyock, and it's so simple. It's M-O-W, like you're mowing the grass, Y-O-C-K-Yock, and that's it. A favorite town of mine, I might say, and I'm delighted to be from there in Currituck County.
Great. Well, I wanted to make that clear as to why I brought that up to begin with. Good evening. This is Open Line. You're on the air.
Fine. I want to talk to Mr. Pointer.
Speaking to you, sir.
He's on the phone with you, sir.
Okay, fine. Well, I'm listening to him.
Right. If you'll turn your radio down, that won't confuse you.
Okay, fine.
All right. Just go right ahead, sir.
Mr. Pointer.
Yes, sir.
I'm from Wilson, North Carolina, and I was born in 1925, and I guess WPTF was the first station I ever listened to.
Wilson is my second home. I'll tell you why after a bit. Go ahead.
All right. So, well, one question I'd like to ask you, you going to have some Fibber McGee and Molly and Jack Benny and other programs that you're going to rebroadcast soon? When will that be?
Now, we were hoping to get this in tonight, and we owe you a debt of gratitude before I tell you a thing, because the telephone was ringing so fast that we were afraid we were not going to be able to tell people about something very exciting that starts next Monday evening, October 2nd, at 10 minutes after 8 o'clock.
10 after 8.
Yes, sir. On Monday evenings, The Shadow. On Tuesday, The Lone Ranger. On Wednesday, Fibber McGee and Molly. On Thursday, Gangbusters. And on Friday, a sort of composite of many things called The Golden Days of Radio. And I understand these will be excerpts from the Fred Allen Show, excerpts from the Jack Benny Show, excerpts from some of the live big band pickups. I'm very much excited about it because it takes me back. I'm living in the land of nostalgia now, and
I am too, and I guess that's why I called you.
Yes, indeed.
I believe I remember one thing you broadcast was the Duke Southern Cal game in January of 1939.
Yes, sir.
True?
Yes, sir. We did indeed.
Yeah, we huddled around the radio because we had Jeff Davis down here from Wilson playing in that game for Duke. And I
I guess the next best memory I have of WPTF is Jimmy Capps during my Carolina years.
He was wonderful. He was wonderful. Jimmy is dead now, as you may know.
Yes, I do know that. But we love Moonglow.
Yeah.
We listen to it every night up at the Hill.
A very, very popular program.
Yes, and the rebroadcast of the Carolina basketball games during the late 40s.
Yes, yes.
From this point, I know you got a lot of other people calling in, and I would like to thank you for what you're doing, and from Wilson, a great big hello to you.
I married a girl from Wilson. That's why I say it's my second home.
Well, who'd you marry?
I married the older of the Forbes sisters.
Jack T. and...
You got it.
Oh, I'll be doggone. Well, they're very good friends of mine.
I married Virginia, who is the oldest girl.
Yes, I know Virginia. I'm a member of the Christian church, and that's where you probably got married.
Well, we can have old home week, couldn't we?
Yeah, we sure could. I don't believe I told you my name. I'm Jimmy Edis, and I run a camera store down here.
Thank you, Jimmy, for calling.
Thank you, Graham. Enjoyed it.
Good night.
Good night, sir. Good evening. This is Open Line. You're on the air.
Bart.
Yes, sir.
Paul Ellington.
Yes, sir.
I was just wondering, we were reminiscing all night. I just wondered if anybody remembered how WPTF became WPTF. We protect the family.
Yes, sir. We, of course, the station was established by Mr. Will Wynn.
Anymore. I used to when I was a kid.
Mr. Will Wynn established the station, you know, in 1924, and he gave it the call letters that more or less represented his company, Wynn Radio Company. It was then WRCO.
Right.
And then when Durham Life bought the station,
Yes, sir.
they took their own slogan, which was "We Protect the Family," and adapted the call letters to that, and it's been that way ever since.
When I was a child, one other thing I'd like to ask you,
Yes, sir.
Graham. Do you remember when they had the orchestra in the Sir Walter Hotel?
Had many of them. One was Bubbles Becker, I recall. One was Gordon and his Pennsylvanians. What'd you have in mind?
Sir?
Which orchestra did you have in mind?
John Ellington?
Yes, yes, I do indeed.
That's my brother. That's my older brother.
Oh, this is interesting. I knew him well.
This is a long time ago, and I was just a child, but I remember you very well.
Yes, we did broadcast with his orchestra from Hotel Sir Walter many times.
The mezzanine, right?
Right.
Okay. I'm glad to talk to you, and hope you have a lovely retirement.
I'm going to work on it, and thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you for calling. Good night. As I recall, Bubbles Becker, at last report, was operating a booking agency or a talent agency in Norfolk.
Bart, you telling me something I don't know.
I don't know whether he's still alive or not, but I heard several years ago that he was operating a talent agency in Norfolk.
I wouldn't be at all surprised.
All right. We'll learn a lot of things, aren't we? Good evening. This is Open Line. You're on the air.
Bart,
Yes, sir.
I wanted to ask Mr. Pointer, going back to the Woofty-Foof review days, I was a child, and as I recall, the studios were down the courthouse alley.
Yes, sir.
But I can, in my mind, I can picture Graham Pointer wearing a straw hat, overalls, and a bandana.
I was hoping you wouldn't bring that up. In those days, we had to do everything, including sweep the floor on Saturdays, and I remember that quite well. We had a sponsor, and I remember who it was, and I'm not going to say, but he got the idea that if I read his commercials, this is radio now, if I read his commercials with the bandana and the overalls and the straw hat, I would be more effective. And I had no choice, and so I did.
Well, that was after the Woofty-Foof review days.
Yeah, the Whoopity-Woof Review had an audience at one time and originated from the stage of the State Theater. It was a little bit too big. In fact, we didn't have studio facilities that would take care of it at that time. So we have some old photographs here showing the program originating on the stage of the State Theater.
That was also in the days when the S&W was in front of the studios.
That is right. Matter of fact, the studios, original Durham Life studios, were in the basement of the building.
Right. They moved you out.
That's right, and then they moved us upstairs, and our exit was on the alley between the old Durham Life building and what is now the new Wake County Courthouse.
And Kingham Scott used to sit by the window in the S&W.
Yes, sir. That's the man.
With gimmicks and galore.
Yes, I'll never forget him. He was one of the great people of our time, I think. A marvelous musician and a great friend of mine, I'm proud to say.
And very witty.
Yes, sir.
Great sense of humor. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Good night. Pappy, there must be a million King Scott stories, but would you recount, please, the story of, I think it was King Scott, when President Truman came to town and stayed across at the hotel?
Yes, Mr. Truman was in town, and this may have been the time when he came to dedicate a statue on the Capitol Square, or it may have been the time that he came to speak at the State Fair. Anyhow, he was at the Sir Walter, and security, as you might well imagine, was very tight over there. You had to have a badge cum laude if you got into that hotel that day. Outside the hotel on Davie Street, there was a line of limousines, open-top limousines. One of them belonged to the president. They'd been there for hours, surrounded by Secret Service people, waiting for the president. Our offices at that time were on the 7th floor of the insurance building. We looked out, and suddenly this individual with something like gunmetal shoes, spats, gray trousers, a cutaway, rose in his lapel, and a top hat, came out of the hotel apparently, and everybody says, "It's the president." He got in the car, one of the cars. He began to wave at a crowd. There was nobody around then because the president hadn't really come out. He waved at the crowd 2 or 3 times, went around and looked at the tires on the car, and then somebody said, "My goodness, it's King Scott." And we realized it was, and then we were afraid that they were going to pick him up and send him away. But I suppose the fates were with the Kingham that day because nobody bothered him. He got out of the car and strolled off down the street.
Oh, that's beautiful. He must have been a fantastically witty and funny person.
He was indeed.
Good evening. This is Open Line. You're on the air.
Mr. Pono.
Yes, ma'am.
Hello, I'm calling from Hildebrand, North Carolina.
Hello from Hildebrand. I used to work up there.
Well, we receive WPTF real good up here, and I listen to you all the time. Just listen.
Yes, you do get us real well, don't you?
Well, you're near Hickory, aren't you?
Oh, about 5 miles west of Hickory going toward Morganton.
Well, I used to teach school at Blackburn, which I don't think there's a school there now.
No.
The Blackburn School, which wasn't very far from Startown. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Down toward Newton.
Yes, sir. My first year as a school teacher was in Catawba County, and I had a whale of a good time.
Well, I've been listening to the WPTF call for quite a while. You know, when you were lower power, we couldn't receive you up here, but now we can.
Well, this is most interesting, and we are delighted to hear from you in Hildebrand.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for calling.
You're welcome.
About the only thing I can add to that is that Newton is near Conover.
You're right.
Good.
You're right.
Good evening. This is Open Line. You're on the air.
Yes, would you please, or Mr. Pointer, would you please,
Yes, sir.
before you sign off the air tonight, give us one of your memorial poems and do it on the history of your life there at the station.
We have exactly 1 minute.
Okay.
And Bart Ritner is...
Hang up and listen.
All right, sir. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bart Ritner is waving to me, and I suspect that I'd better not get into that. Let me say, Bart, that this has been a fine experience for me. I came to this station, as I told you, nearly 38 years ago. One of the first things they did to me when I came here was put me in front of a microphone. And I think it's altogether fitting that tonight one of the last things I'm going to do at WPTF is sit in front of a microphone with my good friend, Bart Ritner.
The pleasure has been all mine. It's been a delightful program, and I wish that it could go on for several more hours. Pappy, thank you very much. Our guest this evening on Kaleidoscope Open Line, Mr. Graham Pointer, Program Manager and Vice President of WPTF Radio. This is Bart Ritner. Good night.
The program Open Line with Bart Ritner, host, is presented in the public interest by WPTF.
Come gather up the savings. It's Tallheimer's Great Fall Sale with a harvest of values on every floor and in every Tallheimer store. Fall in step with smart, thrifty shoppers and squirrel away big values on new fall and winter fashions, home furnishing, and much more during the great fall sale at the Tallheimers nearest you.
Shop Tallheimers' Great Fall Sale, 10 to 9:30 at Crabtree Valley Mall. From the capital city of Variety Vacation Land, Raleigh, North Carolina, this is Variety Radio, Durham Life Broadcasting Service, WPTF, now in our 49th year. Eastern Daylight Saving Time, 8 o'clock.
NBC Radio.